Welcome to the Fit as a Mama Bear podcast. I'm Shelby, a certified strength coach, nutrition coach, mama to two, and all-around health nut. This show is about a little bit of everything healthy, fit, and natural related. So if you're striving to smash goals, eat better, feel better, and enjoy the occasional mom rant, this is the place for you. You're listening into episode 8 today, where I'll be chatting with Graeme Thomas. Graeme has a graduate degree in exercise physiology and sports nutrition from Western University and currently teaches in the fitness and health promotion department at Fanshawe College. He was also my very own personal mentor. Hello, everyone. Today's episode is a fun one and one that was truthfully requested. So today we are learning all about intermittent fasting, which seems to be the latest health craze, and for once, it's one I actually like. So joining me here today is Graeme Thomas. Graeme is currently working at a local college as a professor in the health and fitness industry. I think fitness and health promotion, right, Graeme?
That's correct.
Beautiful. And I've known Graeme for about 8 years now, which is a little alarming. And if you listen into episode 6, where I chat about my own personal twisted, insane fitness journey, you might have figured out that Graeme was my initial mentor. So Graeme's coached everyone from high-level athletes to everyday builders. He has a graduate degree in exercise physiology and sports nutrition. And as I mentioned, is currently teaching here at Fanshawe College in my hometown. So Graeme is the reason that I ended up coaching figure competitors, which was a whole insane, wild situation. And he's also the one who convinced me to get certified as a strength coach, which opened up a whole new realm of training to me at the time. So even more so, he's the one who got me into intermittent fasting all those years ago, which is a technique I still use today with myself and my more intense clients. So really, I've been using fasting for roughly 8 years. I still enjoy it. I use it differently depending on what my goals are at the time. Sometimes it's weight loss or health related, but I still rock some type of fast every single week. Most weeks it's just 2 to 3 12-hour fasts, which are super simple, but I do like to throw in a good 16-hour one every so often, but I guess we'll get into all those details. So Graeme, why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure, Shelby. So I've been in fitness going on almost 15 years now. So it has been a while. Kind of on the coaching, on the more kind of personalized coaching, kind of high level stuff, probably about 12 years on that side. You mentioned, like women's rowing program, the OHL, and then a whole host of figure and bodybuilders. It seems like in the last 10 years or so, the vast majority of my private clients are either the physique athletes or the marathon triathlete types, kind of those two extremes, which on the surface seem to have nothing in common. But then when you really dive down, you realize for those individuals, the nutrition side, is super critical for their long-term outcome of how successful they're going to be in their sport. Whereas team sports, sometimes it's a bit more skill and tactics based. But so that's kind of where I've been on the athlete side. And as you mentioned, also still have done a fair bit of work with the everyday client who's looking, let's be honest, quite more often than not, it is weight loss when people come to see you for the first time. So that's kind of where I've been for the past 10 years, and in the last 5 years, a little less private coaching, and now I am teaching at Fanshawe College. So that's my day job, so to speak, right now.
And how did you get into intermittent fasting? How did you learn about it? And how did you know that you wanted to use it in your coaching practice?
Really, if you think back, like you said, we met about 8 years ago, and that was before fasting was really kind of more popular, more mainstream. There was a few people at the time writing about it, looking at it. So Brad Pilon was one. Martin Burkhans from Lean Gains was maybe kind of the one who was most influential in driving the success forward. But there's other people who'd released books over the past 20 years or so. The Warrior Diet was one which has leveraged a lot of intermittent fasting themes. So it was out there at the time in fitness, but it really wasn't particularly popular. At that time, if you think back almost 10 years ago, it still was, you need to eat 6 times a day. You've got to do this, you're going to go into starvation mode if you go more than 3 hours without eating. So that was the prevailing wisdom at the time. And on one hand,
were all things I ranted at the time.
Yeah, and it works for some people. And then I guess, my personal interest in intermittent fasting really stemmed from some of the animal research and literature that I was reading. The early stuff on fasting, when it was done in rats and fruit flies, you see all these kind of phenomenal health changes. So extension of life, less chronic disease. And so obviously it's lower life form, so you can't fully project out that this is going to be how it works in humans. But when you see some suggestive things like that in an animal model, kind of you're like, well, maybe where there's smoke, there's fire.
Hang
And
on,
then,
I'm still stuck on the fact that they used fruit flies.
yeah, we start, right? Like, no one gets too worked up if you kill a bunch of fruit flies in your research.
All
So
right.
often when you're using bugs to start, it's pretty non-threatening, and then you move it up to rodents because people still aren't too crazy. If a rodent dies, as for the betterment of science, it's when you start getting into these bigger life forms, potentially using like monkeys, where people really have a lot of pushback. But it had been done. So there was research on all different kinds of animals at the time. And the vast majority of those research studies that had come out were showing positive health changes. And then, as I said, there's some fitness writers who'd kind of experimented with it and were showing some kind of interesting results in a human model. And there was a little bit of work coming out of a researcher in Chicago at the time. And she was using alternate day fasting. And basically what that was someone would eat a normal amount of calories one day, and then the next day they'd eat about 25% of their typical calories.
So carb cycling to me.
It was carb and calorie cycling. Yeah, calorie cycling, kind of a very dramatic form of calorie cycling.
Okay.
And she'd shown, and this was kind of with a more overweight, obese population, and she was showing some pretty aggressive results. In the span of like a month, people were losing 20 pounds and that kind of stuff. And so, again, when you see all these things kind of emerge, you have to kind of have an open mind at that point and say, well, although prevailing wisdom is you need to eat, 5-6 times a day every few hours to make sure your metabolism stays revving, whatever that meant at the time. So yeah, experimented it. And at that time, I was always under the mindset as a coach, be willing to put yourself through whatever you're going to ask your clients to do.
Yeah, so you're able to better describe it that way.
Better describe it, and if it's miserable and you understand it, maybe you decide, hey, this isn't actually something I should be telling other people because it really is uncomfortable or it's risky. So I used myself as a guinea pig. And at the time, my girlfriend, who's now my wife, so she was prepping for a physique show. And so we did it together. It was kind of, a cool couples thing. And originally I was just like, we're going to do it for a few weeks here just to try it. To see how it works, and then we'll switch back into a more conventional kind of prep mode. And it worked so well for her and for both of us when we were doing it. That really, we stayed on it for a long period of time. And I was like, okay, well, that's two people who are interested in fitness, who kind of, but I started then expanding it out to others, and I know we chatted about it quite a bit when we were working together. And I know, you started it and worked really nicely for you. Experimented it with a number of my other clients at the time. And again, some were just regular weight loss clients, some were physique competitors, some were endurance athletes. And so, some hits, some misses, but kind of the more you see it in front of you, done by real people, you start to develop kind of pros and cons and kind of how you might need to adjust it depending on the client. So, long story short, just tried it to kind of take, clients of mine off of a plateau. And then for certain people, it works so phenomenally well, like better than anything I'd seen. Then I was like, well, why would you stop? Right? If this clearly is working for you and you can stick with it, keep going. And so now kind of, it's not for everyone, and I'll be the first one to admit it. But there are, I think, a lot of positives with, a fasting approach. And so definitely for people kind of who have, and this is kind of maybe the biggest caveat, you need to have some understanding about nutrition and how your body.
Have good nutrition practices already.
Yeah. So if you're someone who's pretty health conscious and have an understanding of how your body responds to food and exercise, and you know what a vegetable is, and it's not the first time you're trying to, incorporate more vegetables, more protein, all that kind of stuff in your diet. But if you've already done a lot of those things and maybe you're still find that you're stuck or you think your results should be a little bit faster, fasting is definitely something that I found for those type of clients can kind of push them maybe through a plateau or give them just an alternate approach to dieting and, weight management that for some people just it makes it so much simpler for them.
It definitely made it easier for me. So I think I started with one 16-hour fast a week, and I did play around with times. But the reason I started fasting was just I was fairly small, but I could have pushed further. And I was stuck at one stupid body fat percentage, and it was driving me bananas. And you recommended just trying to fast. And I think the first fast I hated you.
Yep. It's generally the response you get.
We'll talk about how you feel on your first fast a little bit later, but it was a little bit uncomfortable, and you have to kind of go in knowing that. But it was one of those things that just kicked up results really, really easily. I leaned out really easily. And then I started kind of using it just with, like I said, more advanced clients who already had a very basic understanding of where they were at. And it does just kind of help bust through plateaus when you're there. And that's just from a body comp perspective, not even an actual health one. So I ended up loving it. And I find it funny that now 10 years later, it's the new thing.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's just kind of the nature of fitness and nutrition. There's really no new ideas when it comes down to it.
No.
So, fasting has kind of been the rage. It's maybe dying off a little bit in terms of popularity, just because keto seems to be the big thing right now. But keto's come and gone, probably 5 times in my lifetime. I'm not that old yet. So, every 5 to 10 years, it seems like something new pops up. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. So definitely fasting was a big thing for a little bit. But when you really go back over human history,
we've fasted a lot.
We've fasted,
for quite a bit, even in religion.
Yeah, it's a big thing. And even to this day, Ramadan, right? Muslims will fast for a month essentially at a time.
It's okay not to eat 6 meals a day.
For sure. And so when you see like all that kind of evidence from the fact that religious people, different religions have different lengths of fast that they follow. And even when you think through evolution, this idea of being a regular meal eater, is really on the last couple hundred years, with the advent of better food delivery, agriculture, and refrigeration. Really,
just
when you
access to it.
Access, right? So before you had ways to stabilize foods and keep them cold, throughout the year, it really wouldn't have been something where we would have been able to eat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner necessarily every day with multiple snacks. It's relatively new in the human timeline when you look at it. So it's not that it's wrong. It's just, but when you think about all these things, and when people initially were so anti-fasting, you had to step back, wait a minute. Well, humans have actually been doing this for millions of years. So let's investigate kind of pros and cons. And the big thing is, again, there's no magic pill, there's no magic potion, there's no one perfect approach. But you can never just kind of dismiss an approach entirely without kind of investigating pros and cons, and then really trying to understand who is this good for. And I think kind of that's some of the stuff. To this day, both you and I, with our clients and ourselves, we still kind of tweak and adjust and try to figure out, because it's not going to work for everyone.
It's trial and error, definitely.
Yeah.
So for those of you just getting into fasting or kind of looking at what fasting is, let's give a brief overview of what it is and kind of why the hell someone would want to be without food for a prolonged time. Specifically, just what are the physiological benefits that for your system to not eat?
Yeah, I guess in the simplest form, whenever we eat, eating is still a form of stress, right? And it takes work. So when we eat food, we do need to break it down. Different people have different reactions to food, and so we can look at, on the extreme end, a food allergy. And so it's not super common when we talk allergies, but there's probably a lot more low-grade intolerances. So a lot of people might be intolerant to dairy, right? So if you have small amounts, it's fine. But if you sat down and drank, 2 liters of milk or ate 2 liters of ice cream, your stomach would be turning around in knots. So that's one that's pretty common. Yeah, so don't do that. Other people may be intolerant to red meat. Some people are intolerant to nuts, shellfish, things like that. So it could be an allergy, could be an intolerance. Often allergies are a little bit more to the protein content in a food. An intolerance seems to be maybe more on the sugar side. Again, overgeneralization, but that's just kind of, simple rules of thumb to remember. So when you realize that, we don't always choose food strictly for purpose. And the fueling, food is fuel, that mantra, which was big in fitness for a while. And it was like, oh, your body's a car or whatever people used to say, and you need to fuel it with premium fuel. Yeah, that's
Ferrari,
nice.
I believe.
Yeah, whatever it was, right? It's fun and it goes nicely on a t-shirt, I guess. But in reality, it's not why most humans eat, right? We eat for pleasure, we eat for comfort, we eat because we're bored, we eat because we're tired, we eat for social reasons. So really, when we look at kind of why people choose the foods that they do, and kind of, we don't always choose foods that necessarily agree with us. So in the simplest form, not eating decreases some of that food-related stress that sometimes we put ourselves under. And when someone's trying to gain weight, they're deliberately overfeeding themselves. So, and you see this a lot more with athletes where, high performance sport is not healthy. I'm going to throw it out
Nope.
there, right? So playing football, is not good for your body. Throwing a baseball at 100 miles an hour is not healthy. Running for 26 miles in a single go, not healthy. It's cool from a performance side, and physiologically, it's super interesting to see what happens. But no one would confuse those with health practices. So same thing with eating certain foods. So although things like Gatorade, as an example, is awesome if you're running a marathon and it will make you run faster, sipping tons of simple sugar is not something we'd ever confuse with health practice. Eating, 300 grams of protein in a day, it will probably do interesting things to your body composition, really help you put on lean mass, stay leaner than you might want to. But from a pure long-term health perspective, it may not be ideal, really, when you boil down to it. Your body's just got to work really hard to break that down. So periodically removing food is probably, at its simplest, just a way of decreasing stress. And what happens sometimes during these extended periods where our body has to, find other ways to get fuel because we're not giving it in the form of a meal, different mechanisms within the body kind of upregulate. We have tons of stored energy available to us. We wouldn't have been able to survive for 2 million years without it, because again, up until a few hundred years ago, there was long periods where we would have gone with little to no calories. So there's periods of famine, there's periods of droughts. Again, before we had really good means of storing food for long periods. So the body fat that we carry around is designed to keep us through these lean periods of the year where food is not very plentiful. So our bodies can do it. And one thing when we remove constant food, it just kind of maybe reminds your body how it was always supposed to work. So there's physiological mechanisms that will upregulate when you remove food. And some of that, and what we might also see during these periods where our body has to just duck into stored body fat, at least in the animal model seems to be this way. Things like cancerous cells maybe kind of get destroyed a little bit more readily when there's not constant access to calories. Again, I'm not saying it works 100% this way in humans, but from the animal side of things, it seems to be that they're a little bit more effective with getting rid of, ineffective tissues and cells during periods where you go without food. So again, that's the smoke aspect. We're not sure exactly if that's how it's going to work with humans. But again, it's suggestive enough that it's worth people trying, just kind of decreasing the amount of food you stuff in your face.
And I think just from a very basic level, it gives your body time to just recover and heal from having to digest something every minute of the day. Like it just kind of does a nice little reset.
There's definitely the reset. And I think another benefit is we're not very good at judging portion sizes.
Understatement.
Right? So there are the clients who, will measure and weigh everything. We call those people anal retentive a little bit, but in reality, they are far more accurate with understanding or controlling how much they eat. So if a client's willing to do that, then that can be an approach that works for them in terms of managing calories. Just making sure that they know exactly, how many 100 grams of this or that they're eating. The average person, when we eyeball things, it's pretty easy to kind of let things slide and make, oh, that's a cup. And you're like, well, it's actually not a cup of rice. That's a cup and a half or 2 cups. And so if every single time we're off just a little bit, it's really easy to eat another 300 to 500 calories more in a day than we thought potentially were.
Which comes into play if your goals are weight loss specific too.
For sure.
Those 300 to 500 calories add up a lot over the week.
It definitely will. So maybe the other, one of the simple benefits is when you tell someone to eat nothing, the rules are, and that's what I've always said, the rules are the easiest diet to ever understand. Right? One of the big problems with, when you think about dieting and where it emerged in the 60s, 70s, 80s, so much of this was numbers based. You need, and percentages was the big thing for the longest time. So, different diets, zone being an easy one, 40, 30, 30, or you need to have 55% of your diet is carbohydrate and 15% is protein and whatever. So, you do the math and you're like, okay, well, theoretically this works, but that's not how we think when we approach food. Like, what's the percentage breakdown of a slice of pizza?
Yeah.
And even
Or
fitness
just when you
professionals.
walk to your fridge and look in it, you're not
Yeah.
like percentages are not what I'm thinking when I'm staring
Well,
at
and
my.
most people aren't, right? So giving people that style of education where you're saying, well, 40% of your diet needs to be carbohydrate, you're like, sure, on paper that makes sense, but it doesn't actually give people usable kind of coaching,
Yeah.
unless they're, again, super anal and want to do all the math themselves, which that's maybe a fraction of a percent of all clients ever kind of find that approach enjoyable. So when you just say, don't eat for X period, or start eating at noon, start eating at 2 in the afternoon, start eating at 6, well, then it's yes, no. Did you eat something before that? Then you're not following the plan.
So that leads us into a question actually that I got on Twitter it's funny because we were talking about rules, but people want to know what they can have while they fast. So I know it's a funny question. A couple of them were valid. So water, coffee, juice was in there.
Juice, yeah.
Bone broth or BCAAs. So I've always just had water, coffee, and green tea while I fast.
Sure. Yep.
Those are my staples. I find coffee and green tea kind of, quote, help fill you up so you don't notice the hunger too. They're a great thing when you're starting to fast because you have something to do, because sometimes it is just an oral fixation type thing. So I've always rocked with just those three. What's your I'm not even going to answer the juice one because no, you cannot have juice on a fast.
Yeah, well, the problem is several celebrities have popularized juice fast as a concept which is different than intermittent fasting. Well, yeah, it's just.
So for the purpose of this podcast, and when we speak about
for the purpose of this podcast, I would not advocate juice fasting as an approach.
What about bone broth or BCA?
Again, to be fully honest, the way fasting works, it's a form of calorie control, and that's the same for every single diet. Really, when you look at kind of diets that are going to be successful, it's going to be something that allows people to control their calorie intake in a way that's easy enough for them to replicate time after time. We said, those numbers-oriented approach, 40, 30, 30, that works for some clients, but not for most, because they don't think mathematically every time they put a piece of food into their mouth. Now, if that's you who loves numbers like that, continue, because I've had clients who that does work for. It's just a small percentage. Other diets might remove an entire macronutrient. So, keto as an example, we talk about that. Right. So no carbohydrates, or very low carbohydrate. So what that's allowing people to do is to control calories. In North America, let's be honest, we do have a lot of really tasty, highly refined carbohydrates that people tend to overconsume. So if you're saying don't eat cereals, breads, and the cereals people are choosing are not the all brand, tastes like cardboard. Like, people aren't overeating that cereal, right? They're overeating Frosted Flakes. They're overeating the junky crap. So if you say, okay, don't eat any cereal or don't eat any breads or anything like that, for a lot of people, that's previously what they were getting a lot of their calories from. So if they stop eating that, all of a sudden, sure, weight's going to come off. Veganism, if you're going the other end of the spectrum, don't eat any meat. Well, yeah, meat comes along with, calories, particularly fattier cuts of meat. So if you're saying I'm not going to eat any meat, it's a form of calorie control. And intermittent fasting is the same. If you're removing meals out of the day, so if you were formerly someone who ate, 5 or 6 meals a day, let's say they were each 400 calories, 5 meals at 400 calories, so you're eating 2,000 calories previously. If you cut 2 of those meals out, because now you're not eating breakfast at 7 o'clock and snack at 10, whatever, so let's say you start eating at 1 o'clock. Well, if each of your meals previously was 400 calories, well, now you've removed 800 calories that day. Right, so
which is pretty significant.
Yeah, and so someone does that once or twice a week. Well, you can see why weight's going to fall off over time. If normally your body's accustomed to 2,000, you take it down to 1,200 on a day. Within a couple of weeks, the weight will start off. That's just kind of the math. So, that's the biggest thing now in terms of what you can consume. Sure, water, calorie free. So go ahead, drink as much water as you can. The reason why coffee and tea probably work so well for people is, there's a little bit of caffeine in there, and caffeine can assist with fat loss. And for some people, it will blunt appetite a little bit. So that will be helpful. And again, like you said, it's that oral fixation. It's just a ritual we have in North America. Hey, let's go for coffee, right? So many things about our workday, about our social lives revolve around eating and consuming. So if you allow people to continue at least consuming a coffee or a tea with, their work colleagues, their friends, they don't feel as though like, hey, I'm being such a weirdo and I have to hide in my basement because I'm fasting or anything like that.
Going back though to the coffee, if you're looking at it from a weight loss perspective, please do not add a bunch of sugar and cream
Yes,
to your
no,
coffee.
we're talking, coffee with a splash of maybe milk or cream or something like that. We're not talking about a frappuccino, which is, worse
or bulletproof coffee.
Yeah, something like, well, bulletproof. Might cause
Well,
some
there
weight
are, I
loss in
guess,
another
packages.
fashion, yeah. But yeah, so, coffee and tea was always something that I allowed clients. Now, in terms of bone broth or BCAs, if that's something that you enjoy doing, it's not going to derail a fast. And that's the big thing for most people. Having a little bit of calories, in liquid form, if it's not cranking your hunger up higher and making you kind of count down the seconds until this fast ends, which
we will get into, don't worry.
Yeah, and do it. If some people just, again, they need something, in which case, go ahead. But it doesn't make the fast any better. If that's people's question, like, is bone broth or BCA necessary? No. Is it going to make the fasting any better? Not really, unless, it's something that you enjoy doing. And again, the calorie content of a BCA-based drink or bone broth is quite low. So, it's not going to force your digestive apparatus to kick into overdrive and kind of really work to break down a lot of those nutrients, which is kind of, what we're trying to accomplish in a fast. So now those would all be fine. The reason why I don't like juice, since we talked about it briefly, as often as, again, it's going to be a fairly concentrated source of sugar. And so you're going to get this big, blood glucose spike. And then sometimes it's the swing in blood glucose levels that triggers hunger for some people. Not for everyone, but some people for sure. So, if you're spiking sugar because you're sucking back a lot of juice and then it's crashing, it's just going to make it really difficult to stay in your fast for a long period of time. It's going to be really hungry, potentially like tired or irritable. So if you're finding that kind of swing in blood sugar is kind of making, your life miserable, then yeah, definitely juice is not one that helps most people in a fast.
Noted. Now, when it comes to the length of fast, so is there a specific duration people have to fast in order to see results, either weight loss or health-wise? It's a tricky one.
Yeah, no. Like, we have to appreciate, we go through periods of fasting every day, right? When you're asleep, for example, like if your last meal at 7 p.m., and then you eat breakfast at 7 a.m. the next day, you're in a fasted period for, close to 12 hours there. Now, sure, there's some people wake up in the middle of the night to slam a casein shake, those hardcore bodybuilders, something like that. But,
which is okay if you're breastfeeding too, because you get really ravenous.
Yeah, no, it happens. And there's shift workers who eat at weird times. But the reality is, our bodies are accustomed to going for multiple hours without eating. We also do it. Sometimes we just forget, like on a weekend, sometimes you get busy, right? So you get up and you've got tons of things on the go. So you miss a meal and it's not like you suddenly die.
It's not the end of the world.
Not the end of the world. People get sick and sometimes, hey, I'm just not hungry right now. And that's fine, right? So our bodies know how to go for more than, 3 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours. So, but if you're talking about kind of how long you have to fast to see weight loss, then it does come back to, well, how many calories are you removing? If you're, say, normally someone who eats breakfast at 7 o'clock, and then you decide, okay, I'm going to skip breakfast a few days a week and go until 10 o'clock before I eat my first meal. And let's say your breakfast is 400 calories. Again, if you're just removing 400 calories at a time, your weight loss will be slower than if someone kind of does a 16, 20, 24-hour fast where they now remove, 1,200 calories, 1,600 calories. So there's not a magic number. If people do want to see weight loss, I would advocate probably going a little longer than just skipping breakfast a couple times a week. It's going to be pretty slow going, but the key thing to remember is, you do need to start slow. And for most people, they're not going to have great success jumping straight into a 24-hour or 36-hour fast the first time they do it. It's really tough. And like you said, the first time you went through, it's miserable. Like, it is 100%. We're so accustomed to eating regularly that our hunger cues are set on whatever that pattern is.
Yeah.
So kind of breaking that, I tell most clients, go through it 3 times, 3 cycles. Maybe that's 3 weeks for the average person. Okay, we're going to start fasting 1 day a week just to try it. And then give it 3 weeks. And this is for most diet changes. I'm like, try it for 3 weeks. You can't evaluate something in the first week. Often things get worse before they get better. right? And that's your body learning to run on a different fuel source or a different kind of meal frequency or whatever it is. And then if after 3 weeks to a month you're still really struggling with it, it may not be the right approach for you.
Okay.
Don't base it on the first time you try something, because often, it's hard. It's like a new exercise. The first time you try to squat, you probably suck at it. So, give it a few weeks to practice and then see if your body becomes more used to what you're asking it to do.
I think it depends too on what the purpose of your fast is.
Yeah.
So again, if you're fasting for weight loss, I'm always a fan of seeing what you can get away with the littlest effort possible and seeing what works, and then bumping up if you need to. But I wouldn't start out by doing 1 or 2 24-hour fasts randomly because you think that's the way you have to go. So I always recommend just try mini fasts first, see how they go, and then add up in duration or days depending on kind of how your results play out, because the last thing you want to do is just stop eating for 24 hours multiple times a week. It's going to suck. Breaking it up quickly here, we're chatting a lot about the best practices for health and weight management. And while fasting is amazing, like everything else, it's not the only answer to the question. In my quest for health, I use a lot of different methods and foods to help me feel and perform optimally. And some of those foods are, of course, superfoods. Perfect Supplements is my go-to for anything unique. I personally grab a lot of my green powders like chlorella and spirulina there, as well as my favorite and most potent green powder, Machinga. I use boosts like this to help keep my nutrition well-rounded. Machinga especially is a blend of matcha green tea and moringa, 2 insanely powerful superfoods, and loaded with antioxidants. One of the reasons I choose to purchase from Perfect Supplements is not only because they have quality products, but they carry a unique variety when it comes to upping your health game. And now you can grab your superfoods and save some money. Exclusive to Fit as a Mama Bear listeners, Perfect Supplements is knocking off 10% of your entire order if you use the code MAMABEAR10. Just head to www.perfectsupplements.com/MamaBear10, save some money, and boost your nutrient intake.
Yeah, it'd suck. And again, I think that's how, when I first tried it, I was just jumping to 24, 36.
It was 24 hours straight. Oh.
I'm pretty sure, memory's a little bit hazy from that time in life. But yeah, I feel like we were doing 24s or 36s right off the hop. And yeah, it's hard for sure. But same thing, we would have had coffee and BCAAs during that time because we didn't really have a full handle on kind of what the best approach was. And there's no best approach, let's be honest. After having gone through it a few times and then tried it with different people, that's not the approach I recommend anymore. I think for most people, the best way to start, let's just take breakfast out, maybe that morning snack. Let's try to get to lunch or just shortly after lunch. So if you're normally someone, again, who eats breakfast around 7 o'clock in the morning and has a morning snack somewhere in there, let's see if you can get to noon, maybe 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon before you start eating, and just take that meal or two out. And for most clients, they're able to do that with little, it's not Herculean effort to be like, okay, I'm just going to skip my breakfast today and I'm going to go to lunch and I'm going to eat what I normally have for lunch and maybe an afternoon snack and then dinner. And then once you feel like, yeah, that's not so bad, then start extending it that way to see how long can I go before I really start to run into some difficulties or find it a struggle.
One thing I think to note too is when you're coming off of a big fast, if your goals are weight loss, actually even health related too, weight loss and health related, you just cut a bulk calories and you gave your system time to do its thing. That's not an excuse because you're ravenous to go eat all the things.
No.
So, I find people struggle with that on their first few fasts as they've come off and you have your post-fast meal and it's great, but it does make you more hungry because you haven't eaten a little bit. And then they're like, well, I didn't eat for the last 20 hours, so I'm going to go have this and this and this. And it defeats the entire purpose of what you just did.
It definitely can. And again, like when we first were playing around with this, I would actually, we're using it kind of piggybacked in around cheat meals for the bodybuilding crowd. So I'd let people go really high. And it's not to say it didn't work because, again, on the surface with some of their weight loss results, body comp change, we were still able to change. But again, I think the health side of that equation maybe takes a beating when people are throwing in, multiple thousands worth of calories of simple sugars or highly processed fats, depending what their food choices were. And then it's the gastrointestinal distress that comes with that, right? Because you've just taken food out for a while. And then maybe, you sit down and eat a whole pizza and chicken wings, something like that. And then the next day you feel awful. And so after having seen that, so again, it's not that people can't do that and still lose weight. It's just it's not necessarily the smartest thing to do from a health perspective, this is really going to be a strategy you want to use for a long period of time. So best for people, like you said, is if you have generally good understanding of healthy eating before you start this, and then just go with your regular meals and don't compensate by adding a ton of extra calories in. And if you can do that, then yeah, if you remove 800, 1200 calories in a day, and you do that a couple times a week or over a month, it's really easy to start seeing, the weight come off without kind of having to micromanage everything in the diet.
And it doesn't mean that I know there's a lot of hype right now over fasting daily, but as you mentioned, you already do fast daily because you don't eat while you sleep. So you are already doing that. If you can just extend times here or there, it makes a very big difference.
Yeah. And again, the daily fast versus kind of once, twice a week, everyone has a different approach. Now, if we're just kind of give your readers, your listeners a little bit of guidance, the more aggressive the fast, the less frequent you should do it. Right. Okay. So if you're someone who wants to go for, a 36 or 48-hour fast, that's not something I would recommend doing every week. It's quite aggressive. Funny story, just for shits and giggles. Sorry, pardon my French. I tried a 48-hour fast a couple weeks ago, just to say, again, put yourself through it. And it was interesting. Not something I would recommend everyone do. But again, it's just nice to play around with sometimes and just kind of see how you respond. But yeah, so those more aggressive 24 is actually reasonable. It's kind of middle in terms of how aggressive it is. Once you start going a full day without any food and then kind of getting to 36, 48, yeah, it starts to become tougher. And you have to evaluate, well, what else am I doing with my life? So if you're someone who's trying to train really aggressively, yeah, going 48 hours, 36 hours without food is going to be tough, right? If you're doing something fairly sedentary, and say, okay, I'm not going to eat for a day and a half, 2 days, and you're sitting around at a desk, again, you're still going to have enough fuel to type on a computer, to write stuff on a piece of paper. But if you're, again, trying to gain lean mass or trying to train intensely for an hour or two a day, these really long fasts are probably not the best approach. If you're, if you're pregnant or if you have, if you're breastfeeding, don't go for crazy long fasts. If you're
I'd also throw in
growing,
if you have young kids, because chasing them with that little fuel, you're going to be angry.
Well, yeah, and that's, so again, like there's a bit of trial and error with everyone and understanding, but again, you can go for a short fast, like just skipping breakfast a few times and going to lunch. There seems to be, and this is seemingly for every diet, a difference between males and females. And just again, long story short, males are more, adapted to intense dieting. It's harder for females. They're far more complex hormonally. And far more valuable from the survival of the human species, if you want to be fully honest. So as soon as a female starts aggressively reducing calories, the body does have some mechanisms that it's going to protect body fat with. Because again, body fat is more important for survival of the species than a lot of lean mass, which is frustrating now in today's day and age, where a lot of females are interested in kind of, improving body composition. And you're like, well, why I'm doing so many good things and I'm not seeing the results that I want? And they're like, yeah, your biology is kind of fighting back against you. Whereas males, it's almost like as soon as they start doing more exercise or more aggressive dieting, they respond in the direction you expect it to. And it's pretty uncommon that a male is so messed up hormonally that they don't respond to a reasonably well-constructed diet and exercise program. It's not impossible, but it's uncommon. Whereas a lot of females, you look at it on paper and you're like, hey, you're doing a lot of good stuff, and they may be struggling to see some change, sitting on a plateau for a long period. So again, it's not that it's impossible for females to lose weight with fasting. It's just you need to be smart, and kind of some of those super aggressive style fast, the 36, 48s, I wouldn't recommend for most female clients.
So start smaller.
Start smaller. And even then, sometimes the fasting every day, old warrior diet style where, you're going 20 hours without eating and then you have a 4-hour feeding window. All that stuff seems to work really great with young guys. And again, those young guys are the section of the population that responds to anything you throw at them, diet and exercise wise. I want to do high rep, sure. As a young guy, you're going to lean out. Want to do low rep, sure. You do that. You can lean out. You could do some cardio, sure. Young guys work help them lean out. So whatever you do with a young male, their hormones are just primed to respond favorably. So yeah, that warrior diet style where you're going to fast every day and only eat for 3-4 hours, sure. If you're a young male, do it. Cool. Like you said, if you're a parent running around after kids, if you're got tons of stress in your life, like it may not be the best approach to have just a single meal. And the single meal also requires some pretty good attention to make sure you're getting enough nutrients in that one meal or the one feeding window to meet all your needs. Right? It is possible, but you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to eat once a day and then sit down and have a hot dog. And be like, well, that's my one meal. Like, well, no, you can get pretty sick in a hurry.
Oh,
So,
God.
yeah.
I think from a practicality perspective too, especially if you have kids and you're basically surrounded by food all the time because they always want freaking snacks, and you intend to fast around all this food that you are touching and preparing that is in front of you, you're making it harder on yourself. To be perfectly honest, do whatever, like, make it as easy as possible to make it as comfortable as possible. So it may not be a great idea to go for crazy long fasts when you know you're going to be surrounded by all this temptation.
No, and again, I think people have to be honest with themselves and understand their situation in life. Like I said, if you've got young kids and you're preparing meals with them, if you're at home with them a lot, it can be tougher. And one of the things I think we all want, for those of us, who have kids, we want to be good role models for kids as well, right? So you want to make sure that, wherever possible, we still have shared meal times, right? You want to be eating with your kids and kind of teaching them proper eating habits and kind of that we embrace different kinds of foods and all this stuff. And it's really difficult if you're never eating. You have to teach those lessons to your kids, to be fully honest. So again, there may be a time and a place where, when we don't have kids, or maybe when our kids are a little bit older and we no longer kind of are eating every meal with them, that we kind of have to find it easier to slide into more of a fasting style routine. But maybe when you have young kids, you decide, you know what, I'm going to change my pattern and go more to a regular, meal routine because it makes sense from a family perspective. And then when my kids are a little bit older, out of the house, I can go back to this more aggressive approach from a fasting perspective. And that's okay too. We're not designed to eat only one particular style over the entirety of our lives.
You can thrive over quite a few.
And you're going to need to change, and that's the reality. Again, when you're growing, the young male, right, the garbage dumps. When a guy's going through puberty as a teenager, it's a phenomenal amount of crap that a young male can eat and still get leaner. Like, it is ridiculous. And so, for that person, is it really as important to stress that you have to have so many servings of vegetables a day? I'm like, it's good to teach good eating habits, but the reality is their calorie needs are so high that if you're only eating vegetables, you're not going to get there in terms of reaching your growth potential, to be fully honest. So you're going to need to eat things that provides easy access to calories when you're a 15, 16, 17-year-old guy who can just eat a ton. Now, for that young boy's parents, should they be eating the same amount of food? No, 100% they shouldn't if you're 45, 50, and your metabolism is a very different state. So again, just keeping things in mind that we're not ever going to have a single best approach to eat, and we're always going to have to be tweaking up and tweaking down over our lifespan to kind of make sure that we get the results that we're looking for.
And fasting's the same. It's a lot of trial and error, to be honest, as to what your body responds to and what you don't hate.
Yeah. And I think the big thing for everyone, no matter what approach to diet and exercise, you got to find something that resonates with you.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I think some of the keys that I found for fasting, and we've talked about some of them, is you should have a pretty good understanding of healthy food before starting. Right. And not just an understanding of I understand vegetables are healthier than chips. That's not.
But your habits.
Yes, you should actually be doing it regularly. You should be eating regular vegetables. Your protein should be, coming from real meat, or legumes, things like that, as opposed to the hot dogs and,
Well, and fasting isn't an excuse. It's not a tool you use just because you binged on cake.
No,
or
it's not
kind of I know we both had a lot of clients who have kind of thought that way too, is that you can just outdo whatever you ate by using fasting, and that's not really what this tool's for.
No, not if you want the best results from it. Again, if it's just, I suppose it's better to periodically fast if you're going to eat a ton of crap than to never fast and still eat all that crap, because at least you're controlling some calories over the course of the week. But again, if you're really interested in kind of optimizing performance or health and using fasting as a tool, it goes in addition to healthy eating behaviors. It's not a replacement for healthy eating. It's really just another way of cutting calories with a relatively simple set of rules. And so that's kind of what I've always found. If a client kind of is just maybe I pick one day a week where I just don't eat until, after lunch or until dinner time, so I can knock 12, 16, 2,000 calories out of my routine. And instead of trying to say like, well, every day I'm trying to be in a calorie deficit of 400 or 500 calories, which is kind of, conventional
Harder
weight
to
loss
control though.
advice. And again, because we don't measure portions as well, so it's easier to kind of slip up on that. Where if you just say I eat nothing until 6 p.m. and then I'm going to eat my regular dinner, well, you've again maybe knocked it close to 2,000 calories that day for a guy. So for a client who's like, yeah, I prefer to just do all my weight management in a single day as opposed to doing a little bit every day, then yeah, go with it. If someone else is like, no, like I like having regular meals all the time, and I'm okay to take a little bit smaller portions, but still eat, 4 or 5 times in a day, then go with the, aiming for a 400 or 500 calorie reduction on a daily basis as a weight loss tool. So again, it's not that one is better than the other. It's just for certain clients, different approaches are better than others.
And I know a lot of questions just come as to what you should eat after fasting. And the truth is you just resume your normal routine based on where you finish off your fasting.
Yeah. Again, oversimplification, but most people find it easier to skip breakfast and lunch than to have breakfast and then try to fast the rest of the day.
I tried that one once. I stopped at after lunch and then went until the next morning at breakfast, I think. And it was horrendous. This was before I had kids and didn't have to deal with sitting down to dinner, but it was terrible. If you sleep half of your fast, sleep half of your fast.
Yeah. So again, and one of the things you see for a lot of clients is as soon as you break your fast, and that's what breakfast is, and whether you have it at 7 a.m., 10 a.m., 2 p.m., it's just you're breaking a fast. Some of our hunger cues then kind of seem to accelerate once you do that. So if you just don't eat coming out of sleep, your body just kind of, you're a little bit hungry, but it's not too bad. But as soon as you have that first meal, all of a sudden, well, now, let's say again, you eat, at 7 o'clock in the morning and have a big meal, but you're still awake, right? For another 12, 14, 16 hours. So you have opportunities to think about food, be presented with food, and have to, conjure up this willpower to be like, no, I'm not going to eat. Whereas sometimes people find that if I just don't start eating and then I get to the end of the day and then have a meal, then my hunger's maybe elevated a little bit, but I'm going to be asleep soon. So
it's not a big deal.
Simpler, yeah. For most clients, they'll find it easier to skip their meals early in the day and then start eating, after lunch or around dinner and take a regular routine at that point.
I will always eat dinner, and then I normally we have an early dinner. I stop after dinner, and then I go till whenever the next day that I'm rocking. I find that the easiest because breakfast is just really easy to overlook and skip, and you're kind of go.
Yeah, and again, most clients are going to find that. And again, if people are working, for example, like sometimes you can get distracted by work, right?
Yeah.
So if you skip breakfast and you have things to do to keep your mind focused throughout, breakfast and lunch, again, you'll get a little bit hungry, but you have other things to distract yourself with. And I think for a lot of people, particularly if you have families, I still think, dinner in North America is that meal where we celebrate being together most. And so that's the one that people want to sit down with, their spouse, loved ones, kids, and kind of share it, eat together. So allowing people to say, okay, we're going to skip breakfast and lunch, but you're going to still be able to eat dinner as a family. I think that for a lot of people also just makes kind of
practical
behavioral sense to be like, yeah, like I can skip breakfast and lunch and then just eat dinner together. And yeah.
So let's talk about how it feels on your very first fast or a couple, because in truth, there are quite a few, I want to say symptoms, but that seems like the wrong word. When you do your first fast, it's very different because we are accustomed to eating all the time. So a few things that I noticed on mine, and you had warned me ahead of time, just on basic things like don't expect to be doing as much creative thinking if you are towards the end of your fast, which was very true. I did end up very kind of brain foggy on my first fast. The hangry symptoms are real sometimes. I'm good now. It's been a long time. I'm good now, but I know for the first 3 or 4 fasts I did, you are angry. Like you're a little bit more irritable. Your temper is a bit more short, which is why I always say just watch how long you're going for a fast when you have little kids, because they tend to rile up your temper.
That they do.
And when you're really hungry, that does not help. But so you will experience a little bit of brain fog the first few times. You're going to be a bit more irritable. What else?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to appreciate in a fast is, again, one of the benefits long term, but short term, we don't see this as a benefit. We're really looking at 2 types of hunger for the average North American. We have physiological hunger, where okay, your body's legit low on nutrients and you need to eat. And then there's psychological hunger, which for most of us, that's kind of what we experience on a regular basis. And so kind of a way to separate those two, and people have used different ones, but it's the boiled potato diet or approach, right? So if you're hungry enough to eat a boiled potato with nothing on it, you're physiologically hungry. Or just plain broccoli or white rice with nothing. Like it's okay. Oatmeal is another one. Just don't put anything on it. So if you're hungry enough to eat a bowl of old-fashioned plain oatmeal, yeah, you're physiologically hungry. Now, if you're like, no, I'm good, but your brain's saying, "Oh, go eat something." It's, again, most of our hunger is psychological. We just have these patterns that we've adopted in North America. Right, so we eat breakfast at the same time every day. Again, we'll go out for coffee, with our coworkers. We have so many of our rituals surrounded around eating or drinking, right? So you can be walking down the street and you're not hungry at all, and then you walk by a Cinnabon shop or something, or a pizza parlor, and all of a sudden, oh man, I'm so hungry, and it's that smell that cues the desire to eat. But 2 minutes before, you were totally fine, right? So again, like just having clients understand the difference between the two. And I think when you go through your first fast, your first few fasts, you just start obsessing about food, right? Because you're like, it's comforting to have access to food. And again, in North America, for better or for worse, we're probably not going through any more extended famines or droughts or anything like that. We have easy access to food. It's relatively inexpensive. Our food security is quite high for the average North American. So the thought of doing without kind of scares us the first time we go through it. And then we sit there and we're staring at our fridge, or we're staring at our oven, being like, there's food in there, I know it, I can just go. And so the key for a lot of people is to get out of the house and distract yourself. Yeah, keep yourself busy, and it makes it easier when you go through it. And then also appreciate that, hey, you're not going to die, but you will be hungry. And like you said, some people get angry. Some people find their concentration the first few fasts is poor.
That was me.
Those are probably the biggest things. Over time, it settles down. Like I said, give yourself 3 times through it, 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, and then see if your body's starting to kind of figure it out after that period. And most clients who are doing it will find it gets easier, right?
It does.
But again, if it's really not getting any easier and it's getting worse, then fasting may not be the approach for you. But yes, those are the major things: hunger. And then for certain clients, especially on longer fasts, depending on what they choose to eat to break the fast, there can be some gastrointestinal issues that kind of come up. And so I think you mentioned it before, is just don't go crazy eating a ton of highly processed junk when you break your fast. Right? It does hurt, right? It hurts short term, hurts maybe long term for the next day. You could feel hungover, if you just hammer a lot of simple sugars coming out of a fast. So those are the major complaints health-wise. There's nothing crazy serious for most clients, to be honest. Now, that's not everyone. There are people who have, certain chronic diseases that probably would be ill-advised to fast. I don't like fasting for people who are in aggressive growth phases. Again, like pregnant females, bad idea. Young kids who are growing, don't deprive them of the nutrients they need to grow for long periods of time. Again, certain kind of chronic disease where you need maybe more frequent feeding to help kind of manage blood sugar, or just kind of nutrient provision. Going for extended fast, not ideal. For the average person, it's more discomfort, though, is kind of what they can expect. They're going to be hungry, might be irritable. You're going to obsess about food, most likely, first few times through. Again, if you give it a good run of maybe a month or so, and then don't try to be crazy going for 24, 36, 48 hours the first time you do it. Try to extend your normal 10 to 12 hour fast that you do overnight, another, 4 to 6 hours the first time you do it.
Honestly,
we'll go for 14, maybe 16.
16 is like it's the last hour or two is uncomfortable, but the first 12, 14, they're easy.
Yeah.
They're really not too bad. After 16, again, you get a little bit more uncomfortable. So I'd say that until you're a bit used to just baseline.
No, and I think that's good advice, right? Like,
it's a good start.
Don't go crazy. We're trying to pull the first meal or two out of someone's day is typically when people start with fasting. So skip breakfast the first time. And if you find that you're starving by 10 o'clock, then eat at 10 o'clock. Next time, see if you can take it till noon or whatever. And then just see how long you can go for. Some people find that, hey, I can go that 20-hour fast and it feels okay. So if that's you, and you can go till 6, 7 o'clock at night before you eat something, or 3 in the afternoon, do it. And if it's not, then eat a little bit earlier. So it's not going to ruin it if you eat earlier. It doesn't invalidate the fact that you've controlled calories. But the big thing is, again, trying to make it work with your life and kind of what you need to do with family, what you need to do for work. I've had great success fasting, with surgeons, because again, when you scrub into surgery, okay, guess what? You can't go eat no in 2 hours. So for someone like that, often it's like, oh, this makes a ton of sense because I have to do it anyways for work. So if you're someone who's in that boat, it may be an approach that makes, again, great sense. If you're someone who, again, is chasing kids around and you're at home with them all the time, yeah, you're going to be confronted with a lot of opportunities to eat and snack. So
it's harder.
It's going to be harder to be truthfully successful on fasting approach at that phase of your life.
So the last question I think that got brought in this past weekend was, obviously, how do I deal with being hangry, which we touched on. It sucks. You go for walks. I use coffee and green tea and water. Like, I need the thing to sip on. So I rock that. But there's no exact ways to deal with being hangry. You kind of get over it. And what she was specifically asking was, is my body going to adjust, or do I need more carbs outside of my fast to make sure that I am okay during my fast?
For sure. You'll be like, again, the human body's fine, so you're not worried about doing any long-term damage with fasting from that approach. Now, some people do find that they want a big meal before they kick off their fast. So, if you're going to be like, okay, my last meal is going to be at 7 p.m. the day before, often what I advocate is having something a little bit higher on the protein side of things, to be fully honest, right? A big protein containing meal. Protein's slower to digest. Some people will pair it with a little bit of, fat. So again, it just slows the release. So as opposed to a big meal of just spaghetti, for example, which, is just pretty much straight carbohydrate, which people process reasonably quickly. Sometimes they'll wake up the next day and feel a little bit hungry with that kind of approach, where if you have a big, the traditional steak dinner type of meat and potato, something like that. It doesn't have to be, but
or protein pudding. That's my favorite.
Yeah, something like that. But again, just higher and protein and some healthy fats as part of your final meal. Make sure it's kind of up there. It makes it a little bit easier the next day to not feel ravenously hungry first thing when you wake up. So that's kind of from the approach of what I found for most clients to be the most successful. And then during the fast, like you said, coffee, tea, water. If you want BCAAs, go right ahead. If you want bone broth, that makes it a little bit easier just to sip on something. Again, we're not talking about putting thousands of calories in the morning. With that kind of approach, you're putting in probably under 100, which for most people is going to still keep them in quite the calorie deficit, and so reap the benefits of the fast.
And I think it's not so much of you adjusting to the fast as much as you just getting used to the symptoms and managing hunger in the general sense.
It will, but so again, maybe can fasting be dangerous? That question. You get better at fasting, the more you do it, and some clients do go too far. If you want to be honest, because they get such a handle on their hunger that you do just feel less hungry. So they're like, well, I'm going to fast every day. And you're like, okay, but are you getting enough nutrition for what you're trying to do? And if you're like, well, okay, I can go 20 hours, no problem. And then I'm fine with just a little tiny salad. You're like, okay. So again, if you're doing that once a week as an approach, and the rest of the week, you're eating your normal 2,000, 2,500 calories, whatever it is that works for you, that's great, because now you're just in a calorie deficit of 2,000 calories, and that's a great approach. If you're saying, okay, well, every day I'm only eating 400 calories,
then there's an issue.
There's an issue, because you have such control over your hunger now, because just like I'm just never hungry. Like, so although this started initially as great, and you got better at understanding your particular hunger cues and separating physiological from psychological hunger, at the same time you have to understand that your body does need nutrition. And so if you've taken your calories so low that it's impossible to get the right mix of micronutrients or vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, you're be low on protein, healthy fats, the carbohydrates, fiber, whatever you need. So from that perspective, it can happen that people take it too far, because they actually understand and become pretty good at tolerating some of the, the mild discomfort that comes with.
And they just become excessive in it.
It's excessive, and that's like anything, right? We have people who become drug addicts. We have people who are gambling addicts. We have people who are shopaholics. They're hoarders, right? So part of what makes us human is, I guess, this ability to just get hung up on one particular thing. And for some people, it is diet driven. And so they'll start with fasting. and initially they have a positive result, and then they just take it too far, and so that's, for any coach who's helping people kind of go through a fast, or an athlete or an individual who's going through it themselves, so again, just be wary that although a little bit of something is great from a progress perspective, doing too much of anything is unlikely to be helpful and
Fair enough.
dangerous. Yeah.
So one last piece of advice about fasting, what would it be? Or tip?
One last tip.
One last thing about fasting. I'll give you mine. You should enjoy it. Don't do things that you hate. If you truly despise not eating for a specific amount of time, you don't need to fast in order to be healthy or to see weight loss. Just heads up.
I guess, the one tip, I say it's not for everyone, to be honest, and it's kind of very similar to yours. I think it's interesting for everyone to try. And like any approach to diet or exercise, like you can't say something's good or bad unless you're willing to try it yourself. So on the weight training side, right, like try lifting heavy for a period and see how that works. Try more moderate reps, try light reps, try going for sprint interval training, try long distance, like find what works for you. And intermittent fasting is the same thing. It's an approach to calorie control. Try it. Give it, again, that 3-4 weeks to make sure that you give it a fair go. If by the end of that month you're like, hey, I'm getting the hang of this, like kind of like the approach, stick with it. If you're like, man, this is making me miserable each and every time I try it, I hate it, then just don't do it. It's not
There's
magic.
other ways.
There are other ways. And again, all diets work by helping people manage the amount of calories and keep them in a deficit in some way. There's different approaches. The reason why I like fasting is because, again, the rules are fairly easy for a client to understand. It's just like, don't eat. And they're like, okay, well, did you eat breakfast? They're like, yes. Then, okay, you weren't fasting. Like, as opposed to giving them percentages or, avoid, so I've found, to me, that's the strength of the approach, is that it's simple to understand. And it is a good teaching tool to help clients understand physiological versus psychological hunger.
Yeah.
Whether they choose to stick with it long term, but just that process of having at least gone through, a month or two of fasting, you start to understand, okay, am I really hungry now? Or is it just that I thought of food and smelled something?
That's actually one of my favorite parts, though, is that's the biggest thing I learned, is that I'm okay.
Yep.
I'm not going to die. And it makes it actually easier for things like traveling.
Yeah, for sure.
Or long car rides, stuff like that, where you would naturally just pick at something or just grab something while you're going. You're like, I don't actually need it. Like, it's okay. I'll be all right.
And so again,
I love that.
You learn some interesting lessons going through fast, and some clients will stick with a fasting-based approach for years and forever, and it can work great for them. Other people just use it for a very short period of time as a way of kind of changing up their approach, shocking the system, whatever you want to call it. I know we have silly names in fitness, and that can work too if it's just something you want to do for a short period of time to try something different. But I think, there's a lot of benefits to it, both from the body composition side as well as some potential kind of health benefits. But I think the biggest thing, again, the biggest benefit is that teaching side of understand your own hunger. And I've always said the number one success tool or outcome when you talk about diet change with the client is you have to control hunger.
Yeah.
You don't have a way of helping that client control hunger. You are going to fail on that diet 100 times out of 100.
No matter what diet it is.
No matter what diet it is, because again, people will do anything for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
We understand this. People can do the stupidest diet or exercise approach for 2, 3, maybe even 4, 5, 6 weeks. But if a diet is making you tired, irritable, hungry, cold, making your gastrointestinal system jump in, tied up in knots, you're not going to stick with it because it's making you miserable. So, these juice fasts or, the old cabbage soup diets from back in the day, like, you lose 30 pounds in your first month and then it's all coming back because you hate this.
And then what happens when you chew, friends?
So one of the things to remember with any diet approach is you got to think, like, is it helping me control my hunger? Right? And as soon as you control hunger, you have this magic thing where now willpower, which doesn't really exist because willpower is just a product of planning. They tell people all the time, right? Don't go grocery shopping when you're hungry because then you buy all kinds of crap. And it's not that you're any smarter having just eaten a big meal before you go grocery shopping. It's just your stomach makes you make bad decisions when you're hungry. So, if we can help clients get a handle on their hunger, then they're more willing to follow the plans that we give them long term. They just make better choices, and that's the magic with dieting. It's not that people don't understand what health food is, right? If you ask anyone walking down the street, this piece of celery or this bag of Doritos, which one's healthier? Like, it's not rocket science. It's like, know that we should be eating more vegetables, right? We know that we should be drinking water and not pop or juice. Like, none of these are shocking to clients, just
But
that
it's habit.
they don't do it, right? So yeah, the Doritos taste good. The grape juice tastes better for a lot of people than water. So it's helping clients kind of, break that habit of reaching for the chips, reaching for the juice, the pop, whatever, they're currently struggling with, and understanding, okay, well, whatever my approach is going to be to help me kind of control my hunger and control my calories, like, is it something that I can stick with for a long period of time for me? And it doesn't mean that it has to work for the person sitting next to me. Doesn't mean that's going to necessarily be the approach that's going to work for my spouse, but it has to be something that client understands and be like, yeah, I can stick with this. And so, fasting, and why I've always, been interested with it and found that it works. It's straightforward for a lot of people. And it's just, I think a lot of people are just like, okay, like, I'm just focusing maybe a day a week on my weight management instead of doing a little bit every day where I have to, knock 300 calories out, 500 calories, however I'm trying to manage that. I just do it all in one day. And so I just don't eat for 16, 20 hours, 24 hours, whatever it is. And then you start eating normal again. And I think that for a lot of, at least the clients I've worked with, it's just like, it's simpler. And they're like, oh yeah, I just like the idea of doing it one day a week instead of 6 or 7. So,
yeah. Anything you have to think less.
Yeah, it's not magic, but I've always found it's simpler in that sense. And again, it takes people about a month, 3 weeks to, a month to really get the hang of it. But once they kind of understand their hunger cues, a lot of clients just like, yeah, this is easy to keep up with.
That's how I feel too.
Yeah.
Well, I think that about wraps us up. So thanks again for listening to today's episode on fasting. I hope more than anything that you took away a few more tips than you had before. Remember, if you're in need of fitness tips, workouts, and amazingly healthy recipes, check out my website at www.fitasmamabear.com. You can also hit up the show notes where I'll post a few of the resources that Graeme chatted about earlier in the episode, as well as how to connect with Graeme. And if you're loving what you're listening to, please subscribe, rate, and share the podcast. Not only does this give helpful information to others who may not know where to find it, but it also helps me out too, so I can keep providing you with more awesome listening. And on that note, check back soon for the next episode. Chat soon, friends.